The neon glow of city lights danced through the rain street windows as Emily hailed her ride. It was late, far later than she should have been out alone, but her friend's birthday celebration had kept her longer than expected, and now, with the streets deserted and the rain pouring down, she just wanted to get home. The Uber app flashed, indicating her ride had arrived. Emily checked the license plate, confirming it matched the one on her screen, and then stepped out into the deluge. The car pulled up, and she climbed into the back seat, grateful for the warmth and shelter. "Hi," she said to the driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. "Thanks for picking me up." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "No problem. Where can I take you tonight?" 671 Maple Street, she replied, leaning back into the seat. As they navigated the slick streets, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her stomach. It wasn't anything specific, just a general sense of discomfort that made her skin prickle. She brushed it off as nerves from being out late and tried to focus on the passing scenery. But then as they turned onto Maple Street, something strange happened. The street lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the road. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she glanced nervously out the window, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. And then she saw it. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing on the sidewalk ahead. It was too dark to make out any features, but Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She turned to the driver, her voice trembling. "Did you see that?" He glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowing. "See what?" Emily pointed ahead, but when she looked back, the figure was gone. She swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Never mind. It was probably just my imagination." But even as she said the words, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. Emily kept her eyes glued to the window, half expecting to see the mysterious figure lurking in the shadows again. But they reached her apartment building without incident, and she breathed a sigh of relief as the car pulled up to the curb. "Here we are," the driver said, turning to face her with a smile. "Safe and sound." Emily returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks again for the ride." She reached for the door handle, but before she could open it, the driver spoke again. "Wait." Emily froze, her hand hovering in midair. "What is it?" The driver hesitated, his expression troubled. "I know this might sound strange, but I think we should take a detour." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "A detour? Why?" He glanced nervously out the window, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't explain it, but I have a bad feeling about your building. Something doesn't feel right." Emily's stomach churned with fear. "What do you mean? What's wrong with my building?" The driver shook his head, his eyes darting back and forth as if searching for something. "I don't know. I think we should get out of here, just to be safe." Emily hesitated, torn between her instinct to trust the driver and her desire to get home as quickly as possible. But then she remembered the strange figure she had seen earlier, and a cold chill ran down her spine. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Let's go." The driver turned the car around and began to drive in the opposite direction, away from Emily's apartment building. The rain continued to pour down, drumming against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fingers. As they drove, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over her like a shroud. The streets grew darker, the buildings more dilapidated. It was as if they had entered another world entirely, a world where time had stopped and forgotten things lingered in the shadows. And then, just when Emily thought things couldn't get any worse, the car sputtered to a stop. "What's going on?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. The driver cursed under his breath, fumbling with the keys. "I don't know. It just died on me." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced out the window. They were on a deserted road, surrounded by dense forest on either side. There was no sign of life anywhere, no lights in the distance, no sound except for the rain. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. The driver nodded, his hands shaking as he tried to restart the car. But no matter what he did, the engine refused to turn over. "We'll have to walk," he said finally, his voice grim. "There's a town not too far from here. We can find help there." Emily nodded, her throat tight with fear. She'd opened the door and stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking through her clothes in an instant. The driver followed suit, and together they set off into the darkness, their footsteps echoing against the silent trees. The walk felt like an eternity. The rain soaked them to the bone, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. But finally, just when Emily thought she couldn't take another step, they stumbled upon the town. It was like something out of a nightmare. The buildings were crumbling and decayed, their windows boarded up and their doors hanging off their hinges. There was no sign of life anywhere, no lights in the windows, no sounds except for the howling wind. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The driver nodded, his eyes scanning the empty streets. "We need to find help. There must be someone here who can fix my car." They made their way through the deserted town, their footsteps echoing off the crumbling walls. But no matter where they looked, they couldn't find a single soul. And then, just when Emily was about to give up hope, they saw it. A flicker of light in the distance, shining through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Without a word, they quickened their pace, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they drew closer, they realized the light was coming from an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. It was like something out of a horror movie, with ivy crawling up the walls and broken windows staring out like empty eyes. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Emily knew they had no other choice. With a trembling hand, she pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The inside of the house was even more decrepit than the outside. The floors creaked beneath their feet, and the air was thick with dust and decay. But despite the eerie atmosphere, Emily felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. At least they were out of the rain. "We should split up," the driver said, his voice low with urgency. "You search upstairs, and I'll search down here. Maybe we can find something to fix the car." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't like the idea of being alone in this creepy old house, but she knew they didn't have a choice. With a deep breath, she climbed the creaking staircase and disappeared into the darkness above. The upstairs was just as abandoned as the rest of the house. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards groaned with every step. But despite the eerie atmosphere, Emily pressed on, determined to find something, anything, that could help them escape this nightmare. And then she saw it. A door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, with a flickering light shining through the crack. With a sense of trepidation, Emily approached, her heart pounding in her chest. What could be behind that door? And why was there light coming from inside? With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. And that's when she saw him. A man, tall and shadowy, standing in the center of the room. His eyes were empty sockets, his mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized what she was looking at. A ghost. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. All she could do was stand there, frozen in terror, as the ghost slowly advanced towards her, his laughter echoing through the darkness. And then everything went black. Emily woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she didn't know where she was or how she had gotten there. But then the memories came flooding back. The Uber ride, the dead door, the abandoned town. She glanced around, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. She was lying on the floor of the abandoned house, the driver kneeling beside her with a look of concern on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft with worry. Emily nodded, her throat dry with fear. "What happened? Where are we?" The driver helped her to her feet, his expression grim. "I don't know, but I think we're in trouble." As Emily struggled to make sense of what had happened, she became aware of a strange sound echoing through the darkness. A low, guttural growl, like something out of a nightmare. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely more than a whimper. The driver glanced nervously around the room, his hand hovering near the pocket where he kept his phone. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here now." With that, he grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her towards the door. They raced down the stairs and out into the night, their footsteps echoing off the empty streets. But no matter how fast they ran, the growling followed them, getting closer and closer with every passing moment. They ran through the deserted town, their hearts pounding in their chests. The growling grew louder and louder, echoing off the crumbling buildings like a death knell. "We need to find shelter," the driver gasped, his voice strained with fear. "Somewhere we can hide." Emily nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But as they searched desperately for a place to take refuge, they realized the truth. There was nowhere to hide. The town was deserted, its buildings empty and decaying. There was no one to help them, no one to hear their screams. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, they saw it, a flicker of light in the distance, shining through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Without a word, they raced towards it, their hearts pounding in their chests. And as they drew closer, they realized it was coming from a car parked at the edge of town. The driver's Uber, miraculously fixed and ready to go. With a sense of relief unlike anything they had ever known, they climbed inside and slammed the doors shut behind them. The engine roared to life, and they sped off into the night, leaving the abandoned town and its sinister presence far behind. As they drove away, Emily couldn't help but glance nervously out the window, half expecting to see the ghostly figure lurking in the shadows once again. But the streets were empty, the darkness unbroken. And as they left the nightmare behind them, she knew one thing for certain: she would never forget the true horror of that Uber ride and the terrifying journey it had taken her on. For some horrors, she realized, are all too real, and once you've experienced them, you can never truly escape.